If you remember back to the dynamic EQ video, we talked about how movement is such a critical factor in the modern mix. EQ is a static process, but dynamic EQ gives you that extra dimension of movement. And that's really the focus of this video, where we're talking about using the compressor to quote unquote make it pop, give it more bounce, give it some movement, have it go along with the BPM that you've sent. And really, once you take care of that peak limiting and you reduce some of those peaks down without really drastically changing the signal, things can start to sound a little bit lifeless. And that's where the compressor comes back in, not to necessarily limit dynamic range, but to just add some additional movement into the signal. So if I go in here, for example, and I just add some movement of my own using the clip gain, I can even sync it to my little click points here. You can hear all that bounce that's being brought into this. Now, this is maybe an extreme example. This isn't necessarily something you'd be able to program with a compressor, but it gives you the idea of how you can bring new bounce and new life just by changing the movement ever so slightly. Because now if we listen to this first hit in relation to the rest of these guys, the rest are going to sound kind of boring. And again, this is kind of extreme. Hear that movement there, that boom, boom, and that's really what you're going for in this example of make it pop. So again, you're going to have to like listen in context and hear where this may be appropriate and where it may not be, but subtle bits of this can honestly be appropriate on almost every track, with the exception of something like a vocal or like a piano, where you still want that naturalness to be there. But with a synth part, with any kind of drums, this can be a really useful strategy. And that's what we're going to look at here in this video. So let's start by going to something we've looked at before, which is the FR Comp 87. And making it pop is an example where you may want to actually hear that compressor movement. So I want to hear that release time specifically coming back. The attack time, that's really up to you. And now these are hardwired attacks, so you have to really use your ear. But chances are, if I've already taken care of peak limiting and I've brought down the peaks, I'm not going to want to use fast, because that's just going to be hitting that peak again. Not only that, but I have a limiter that is built into this guy if I do bring the makeup gain up pretty hot, and then that will be clipping down there on the peaks again. So let's just go ahead and see if we can make this pop a little bit. So you can actually hear in this example, fast isn't wicked fast. We're still hearing that initial transient pop through, but I can emphasize that even further then. And this would, for me, be the right kind of a setting, all right? It's a very powerful, punchy kind of a sound. And we could try messing with the release, but chances are we're going to want it to be fast, because we want to hear it sucking back up, so to speak. And if we go with medium or slow, which almost sound the same, it doesn't give you that movement, and that's what we're looking for here. So now we can just bring the makeup gain up, maybe get a little bit of that limiting. That's where you're getting that movement, which is exactly what you're looking for. So a compressor like the FR Comp 87 will definitely get the job done for you. And this one has some character to it as well. So it's not as clean or transparent as the examples we looked at in the last video, but we could use something like that. And nowadays, especially in modern mixing for contemporary pop music, something like a dynamic EQ can be really popular, because we can not only get the movement, but we can maybe emphasize the low end of this a little bit more, so that you get that kind of sub boom through, especially if this was going to be played back in a club or something. And so I can go in here and use the Nova, and now finally I have actual attack and release settings that I can use. Let's take a look at the analyzer here and try to set this up. We'll add a little bit here. and then I'm going to turn off the other bands. I'm just going to use band 4. I'm going to bring the frequency way down, and we're going to use a shelf to do this. I actually think getting more of a scoop is the way I want to do it here. This is going to be interesting. Let's take a listen to how this works. Turn on the threshold. Okay, this is just for band 4 now. And it's all about setting that release time to taste. Too slow. So somewhere in this range sounds good. A lot more power, a lot more punch. It's really kind of biting through, and that's thanks in large part to the movement that we have here on that upper band. So this is kind of why dynamic EQ, in my opinion, is going to become the more popular option, because it really gives you the shaping that you want with an easy to use interface. That being said, we'll go for one more example, which is going to be a preview for what we're going to look at in the next video, which is to use a specialty compressor. You remember we had the specialty EQ when we looked at the PTEQX. Same idea here with the specialty compressor. You're only going to use it on a couple of parts that you really want to have stand out. All right, so in this example, it's very simple. We have these predetermined attack and release settings, so you can't go in there and choose those manually. But then sometimes this will work really well if what happens to be programmed on the back end here behind the interface works well with the signal you have. So let's first try with fast. Let's match gain. So in this example, the fast is actually probably maybe a little bit too fast, or the release just happens to be too slow, because this takes away all of the punch and the energy. So this compressor, at least in fast mode, is not going to work very well. Let's try it on slow. Okay, this is letting that initial transient come through a little bit more. We're getting some beef to this. We're getting some body to it. But let's see if it sounds better with or without the compressor on. So we're at minus 5.2 here. Yeah, we're adding 2 dB of gain, and it doesn't sound that much better to me. And then let's try auto. Yeah, again, maybe at subtle settings. So the way auto works is it has, I think, a pretty fast attack time, but then the release time tries to react to the signal. So in this case, because it's a transient signal, the release time should be a little bit quicker, but I'm still not hearing a good enough difference. Minus 6.2. Yeah, we're still adding in like a dB here. And I honestly prefer the other options that we had. So this is another prime example here where just because the interface looks really cool, just because it has this like analog or vintage kind of vibe, it's not going to work on everything. And I honestly didn't even do an experiment with this before recording the video, so I didn't know how this was going to work. And for my ear, I don't prefer the way that this sounds on this particular kick drum. You might, in which case you're absolutely free to use it. But again, this is all about using your ear. It's all about listening in context, adding that little bit more bounce, adding that little bit more movement. And I often find that when you have a compressor or a dynamic control, that gives you a variable release time specifically where you can really try to lock it in. That normally ends up being your best bet for making it bounce and making it pop a little bit more. But again, it's up to you. Use your ear, figure out what you think sounds the best, and go with it.